thank the Lord for a love of fathers.
That's right.
And I thank Him for the fathers, not only the natural fathers He's given us, but that He is our Father. But as I was reading this text, I was thinking about these Galatians. Paul is writing to the Galatians, and he's looking, talking to them and addressing them because they somehow forgot who they were. You know, sometimes we forget who we are. Sometimes we forget who we are and what we're called unto. And the Galatians, even though they had heard the gospel, they'd come to the faith in Jesus Christ. They got bewitched, Paul said. They got led away. You know, something crept in and someone started to preach another gospel and they got carried away by it. Why they got carried away? Because they forgot who they were. And so Paul, in his discourse, was reminding these Galatians who they were. Sometimes it's good for us to step back and remember who we are. You know, lately, a couple weeks ago, I've been thinking about who I am. And sometimes when you start to think about who you are, you start to think about the circumstances that have brought you to the place where you are. You start to think about the things that led you to where you are today. And as I started to think about it, I started to think about my own family. I started to think about how I've always said I've been blessed to have 3 fathers. I have my natural father who gave me my DNA, and then I had the father who raised me, and then I have my heavenly Father that's been there every step of the way.
That's right.
And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my father who raised me and who was there, who put me through school, who was there to support me and do all the things that a father should.
That's right.
And I remember thinking back, you know, my first 9 years I lived without a father, and I remember the excitement. I remember the joy that, you know, my mom, when she brought this, I have to tell you, most of my, and I don't know if she's going to listen to this later, but I remember being young, and children have a very keen sense. Those of you who know kids are very perceptive. And when they don't like something, they'll tell you.
That's right.
And I didn't like any of my mother's boyfriends. I didn't like them. I didn't care for them. This is before she was in the church. I didn't like any of them. And I made it a point to tell her too.
That's right. That's right.
But there was something different when then she brought this man home and she started going back to church, and you know, she brought this man home and started to bring him around the house. There was something about him that, you know, everybody kind of just gravitated towards him. He had just a gentle demeanor, a calm nature about him, and everyone gravitated towards him. So much so that, you know, when she came home and decided, you know, with a big flashy ring on her finger, said they're getting married, we all rejoiced, for he was already part of the family. But for me, it was an especially poignant time, because all this time I'd lived without a father. To me, at that point, it wasn't really a big deal, but now I remember distinctly one of my classmates had asked me, well, how does it feel to not have a father? And I hadn't really thought about it before that, because, you know, I had my mother, my grandmother, and, you know, generations of strong women who raised me in the right way, and I thank the Lord for that. But there's a reason that the Lord implements families as He does. There's a reason that parents work together. And so as I started to think about it, you know, in my 9-year-old mind, I started to think about what it means to not have a father and what that entailed.
Right.
But you see, I did have a father. I had a natural father, one whose DNA I still carry to this day in the natural flesh.
That's right. And
something happened that when, we're moving this morning, so stay with me. It's my nose first, we're going to move on. I remember, like I said, children are very perceptive. Children are very perceptive, and sometimes when you don't think children hear, they hear. You know, I got really excited because you know, there's a whole bunch of things were happening at the same time. My dad had got a job transfer, and so we were moving to the States, and, you know, I was so excited because it was going to be a new place to go, a new place to live, and, you know, new friends, and I was excited because we were going to start a new family, so he was going to be my father, and they told me, my mom and my dad sat me down and said, listen, we're going to go through the adoption process, and we're going to adopt you, so we're going to be a real family. You're not going to have your old name anymore, but you're going to carry a new name. They're going to say a new name. New name. And I was so excited because I was going to have a new name. I was really going to be a part of this family. See, some of us walk around like bastard children. We think that we don't really fit in the family. I don't know if you've ever felt that, but sometimes you feel like you just don't fit in your family. You feel that, you know, the circumstances of your birth were an accident. And so many of us have been told that we are accidents, but I'm telling you, there's no accident in God. For every one of us has a purpose for our lives. Everyone has a purpose, and it's here for a purpose. But sometimes in our minds, you know, parents or other people not using wisdom or out of their own sin, they say things that stick with us as children.
That's right.
And as we heard in our Sunday school lesson, children are molded by those who are around them.
That's right.
And so when these things are spoken, it sits in a child's spirit, and they think about these things. They start to dwell on these things. They start to believe these things.
That's right.
And so imagine my excitement at 9 years old, how I was not going to be considered a bastard child anymore, but I was going to be a part of a family. I was going to bear the name as proof
That's right.
that I was a part of this family. But something had to happen on a legal standpoint. See, as I said, I already had a father. I had a father whose name I bore, who at birth I received his name. And even though I didn't have much contact with him, there was still a legal process that had to happen.
Go ahead.
You see, legally, he was still my father.
That's right.
Even though he wasn't in the picture very much, and I saw him maybe once every 5 years,
That's right.
he was still legally my father. So he still had a legal claim to my life. And so I remember sitting in the back seat of the car and going to the lawyer's office, and the lawyer drafting up notices and declares he had to write a letter and say, listen, this man wants to adopt your daughter, so we need your permission to be able to sign the papers over. We need your permission because right now you still have a hold on this child.
Right.
And so we need your permission for this to go through. And I remember that they wrote 3 letters, letter after letter, no response. And I remember they put an ad in the paper just in case, they went to visit and no response. And so because of that, the adoption was warranted because of default. So in other words, there was no contest, there was no fight, there was nothing that stood out. There was nothing to contest this adoption.
Right.
And I remember it was March 17, 1993. I remember the day so distinctly because we were sitting in the back seat of my car when my dad got the call. And I remember my mom being so excited and saying, listen, the adoption's gone through, we've gotten the papers and everything's set, now you're one of us now. You're part of the family, it's official. Parents say things, sometimes they don't actually mean what they say, but it's official. And I remember, because it was my birthday, I remember thinking, she's like, what a great gift, now you're really a part of this family. And I remember in my mind, there was such a mixed feeling. Because yes, I was happy that I was adopted into this family, that all the legalities had been put together, so now I could officially write my name as Robertson instead of using that old name that I used to use. But there was a problem. There was a problem. Part of the problem was that the reason that I was allowed to be adopted is because someone didn't fight for me. Someone in my mind didn't care. Someone in my mind didn't care enough to put up a fight to say, listen, this is my child and I want my child. I want to keep the rights that I have to this child. And so it was a mixed day. And I remember my mom looking at me like, aren't you excited? Aren't you happy? And I couldn't say anything because how could she understand that feeling of not being wanted? Not being cared for. This was supposed to be, I thought in my mind, oh, well, if my own father can't want me, how could anyone else want me? And it was a problem because it affected the relationship that I had with the man who adopted me.
That's right. Push it on.
It affected me because I figured, well, if this natural man who gave birth to me, if he didn't even care, how can I expect this man to love me? How can I expect him to bestow all his love and his care on me if my own father couldn't do the same?
That's right.
And it's a problem when our past relationships affect our future. Why? Because they mark us, and not only do they mark us, but they affect the way we behave. They affect who we are and who we become and how we treat other people. And so I looked at my father, my dad, as I call him. My father's my natural father, my dad is the one who raised me. I looked at my dad, and he was never big on saying, I love you. He was never big on saying, I love you. But what he did was, he proved his love. For you see, from the moment that he adopted me, even from well before, he treated me as his own. He treated me as if I was his own from the very beginning, and I thank the Lord for that. But in my mind, there was a blockage. I couldn't understand that love. I couldn't comprehend it. There was a blockage, and I couldn't receive that kind of love. And because I couldn't receive it, I couldn't reciprocate it in the same manner. Now this is a problem because when someone is giving you love, you can't reciprocate it. There's a breakdown.
That's right.
A little more Kleenex here, Pastor. There's a breakdown.
I got your
There's a breakdown. And it wasn't because I didn't love him, but it was because I had such a hard time understanding the depth of his love.
That's right.
See, he may not have ever said it, but he did it. He demonstrated his love by, getting up at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning to go and work long hours and work a job that eventually killed him to be able to provide for his family. He did it by, sending me to the best school so I could have a better life and better opportunities than he had. He showed it every day by providing for his family and making sure that we were in the house of the Lord, making sure that we had a solid foundation, making sure that we had family devotion. One of the things I always remember about my father is family devotion.
Go ahead.
Now when I was a little kid, I used to I wasn't a fan of family devotion because I had to put aside my Saturday morning cartoons. But he insisted that we get together and we spend time before we did anything else. That we spend time in the Word and we spend time in prayer. And I thank the Lord for that heritage. For even to this day, those are the things that carry you. Those are things that you remember. Those are things that you hold on to. The godly examples that are set before you. But even though I had this godly example, even though I had this godly example in my own house, I had a hard time receiving the love that he showed.
Go ahead.
Now, as I mentioned, my dad took sick after a while. I remember when I was going off to university, I remember, even in his frail state, he was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, cancer of the liver. And by the time they found it, the tumors had grown. There were 5 tumors. They couldn't even operate. And so I watched this man who had labored for so long and so hard for his family wither away. And I remember before I was leaving for university, I remember something small, and it seems so little, but it stands out in my mind. My father was always one, and my dad was always one who was very well groomed, who took care of himself. And I remember he had gotten so weak that his fingernails had started to grow long. And I remember I saw that, I said, my God, what a good thing it would be for me to just sit down and just clip his fingernails. Just do that to take care of, to show love to this man who had shown me so much love. But I couldn't do it. Why? Because I was afraid. I was afraid. To this day, I don't know what I was fearful of. But I remember being afraid. And that fear kept me from showing the love that I had inside this, showing the love that I desired to show to this one. And that was one of the last times I saw my father alive, for while I was at school, he passed away. And all the things that I desired to say, all the things that I desired to do, I couldn't do. Why? Because it was too late. Now, as I was thinking about this, I was realizing that oftentimes we treat our Heavenly Father like I treated my dad.